Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, and a huge thank you for sending in all these questions beforehand. It is a huge help if we know a little bit better what you want to hear about and what you want to talk about. So that really helped, and thank you so much for sending in all these questions. I think I managed to properly answer already about half of it, and we'll see just how far we get. I'm very excited to have you all here. I hope you are all well, and so good to seeing you all again. Mark?
Roger, how are you? Minda, thanks for hosting as usual. Welcome to everyone. This should be a fun one. We just got done with Watches and Wonders. We're all just kind of barely recovered from that, but lots and lots of new watches to discuss, as well as trends and anything else that you guys want to talk about. So, without further ado, I guess we should kick it off.
Yes, Michael? So, and as with every time, just use the chat function if you have a question, if something else is coming up. We pretty much worked on 3 chapters. We just give you a quick heads up on the upcoming issue, which should be at the newsstand on May 11th. Then we have prepared a short summary of Watches and Wonders. I'm sure you've by now have already seen quite a lot of watches that were released, but we've just tried to give you a quick overview, and then we'll dive into some of the questions that were sent in. So, next one. This was fun. Mark, you had the cover story this time.
I did, and it was so hard keeping under wraps all that great stuff that IWC gave me access to really early in order to do this cover story. Especially the new 43 millimeter Big Pilot, which was their biggest new release, though obviously not their only one. I think we'll be seeing another more technically fascinating one in the presentation, but. Yeah, I spoke with Christoph Granger Herr, the CEO of IWC, as well as the technical director, Christian Knoop, about this story, and we really got the full background of how the IWC Big Pilot BP43, as they're calling it, was developed. The best quote from the story was Christian pointing out how they really, really needed it's such a classic piece, and to shrink it could have gone really, really wrong to people who
Yep.
love that watch. And he said the amount of prototypes they did was quote crazy, and they just needed all the dimensions to be perfect, all the design elements to line up, and it did a pretty good job, I think. And that's just one of the stories in the issue.
I
Uh,
fortunately did get to see the pieces in real life. They now have a quick release strap system that is really easy to work with. The watch looks really good on the wrist. Personally, still not the biggest fan of a big pilot on bracelet, but that's the same thing with a Portugueser. I do prefer the combination with a leather strap, but the watch itself is really gorgeous, and the blue dial is really nice. So a nice cover story, and Mark, you've done a really good job in covering that piece.
so much. And you also had a bit of about the state of the industry in that issue, correct?
Yes, I was. I think I spent like 4 days just digging through numbers. So it's a 4-page story on how COVID has impacted the industry, how many people actually work in the Swiss industry, how many watches are being exported, what's happening, what was the impact of last year. So it's really starting with market shares, pretty much everything in numbers. The only thing I regret is that there aren't any data on the Japanese watch industry or the German watch industry. So it's still very Swiss focused, but it gives, I think, a nice little overview on what's happening and what's going on. We also spoke to Tissot and got to handle one of their upcoming dive watch releases, the Seastar 2000. I did an interview with the new CEO and heard some exciting news that they're actually planning on doing a museum in Le Locle. So they're too focusing a little bit more on collectors, and I think that's exciting with Tissot. Speaking of that, if you're looking at the upcoming Philips auction in Geneva, suddenly you do see Tissot's coming up there. So I think there's a nice thing going on with one of the more important brands that we have, and actually one of the brands that is accessible. The rest in there, we have the Speedmaster with caliber 321. We have the Submariner with the green bezel. We have the Zenith Chronomaster Sport. That too was a review by you, Mark.
Yes, and I know we spoke about that a bit last time, but it was really fun to actually get my hands on one and get into the whole how this version of the El Primero movement is different than others and why it's special. They kudos to Zenith for providing me so much technical information. We really were able to drill down on that movement all the way down to like the different teeth profiles for the wheel. I mean, if you're a tech head, you're really going to love this one. So yeah.
And that too turned out to be a cross-continental story. I did the stories and I did the photos in Switzerland. You did the story in New York. This time you two had the watch with IWC. Was a bit more difficult. Right. But certainly something that we're excited about, and we hope you'll enjoy the upcoming issue. The current one is still out, still getting letters from you, feedback, and I enjoyed doing that one as well. So shall we dive into Watches and Wonders?
Yes.
So let's just start with the one that might be difficult to get. It's the 90th anniversary of the Reverso, and I think it's one of your favorite watches, Mark, the Reverso in general.
It is a good memory, yes. Yes, I love the Reverso. This one is just off the charts as far as how complicated it is. It is the 90th anniversary of the Reverso, and this watch just combines just an amazing number of complications. It's the most complicated piece probably from the entirety of Watches and Wonders. And I'm not sure how many of them they're making. Obviously, it's not that many, but and this is 10, right? And alongside this watch, there was the green on the simpler side, but beautiful was a green dial Reverso Heritage, and another new complication with the first ever Reverso jumping hour display, which is kind of surprising because they've done everything with a Reverso, but this that was also new. And obviously, this is just we'd take the whole hour to list what this watch can do.
Yep, and it's mind-blowing to see that they squeezed a movement into parts of the case that initially were not made to house a movement. So it's 1.35 million euro. 10 pieces are going to be made. I would assume that they might already be sold, but it's an insane piece. Michael, next one. So we're lowering the price level a little bit. These are the perpetuals. That's something that's going on for a couple of years. It's the 7th world record for Bulgari. They have launched a Finissimo perpetual calendar, both in titanium and in platinum, starting at $59,000. And Patek did a bit of a surprise move pretty much at the last day of the show, after they had already released the Nautilus on the first day. They came with what perhaps is their real highlight of this year, which is the perpetual calendar with a linear window at 12 o'clock, which personally I still have to get used to. Mm-hmm. Price here, $130,108, which means that it's just a straight conversion from Swiss franc to $2. Next one, Michael.
And just a reminder, if anyone has questions, you can write them in the chat or raise your hand or direct message me. I see a lot of people looking very closely at things, so you can interrupt us at any time.
That's the category beautiful pieces, and I think the Vacheron Ultra Thin is one of my personal highlights. It's the same as with the Call of Bucher that we're going to see on the next slide, and the Bulgari that we've seen on the previous slide. It's with a oscillating weight that goes around the movement, so that helped making it actually thinner. It's limited to 15 pieces made in platinum. Unfortunately, 280,000 is quite steep for a watch that's undoubtedly beautiful to look at. And I would assume the Lange is everyone's darling with a rose gold dial limited to 150 pieces, so it will be difficult to get, priced at 116,000.
The Lange was one of my favorites also. And someone commented that it was difficult to read the date on the Patek. I don't think anyone would have that complaint about this Longa watch with the outsized date there. And it
Yep.
just goes to prove it goes to prove this watch especially. It's the first sole perpetual. I mean, it's hard to kind of not overhype it. They've done perpetual calendars, but they've not done a Longa one with just a perpetual calendar, and this is the first one of those. And it just kind of reminds you of how versatile, and if there's fans of the Longa one out there, I assume there are, just how versatile that design is. I mean, it's such an iconic design, and it's so unconventional and differently balanced, but they've managed to get so many different complications with that design. So they really kind of struck gold when they came out with that.
The only thing I still have to get used to is the blank date disc when we have the first single digit days. That's something that I fortunately can always use as an excuse to not sell my kidneys to get one. Apart from that, absolutely mind blowing. Michael, next one. I mentioned that before, and I think it's also interesting to have the price comparisons. Again, the Call of Bucher Monero Minute Repeater Symphony was scheduled to be launched last year at Basel, but because apparently Basel didn't happen and nothing really happened last year, they have kept it till this year. It's the most complicated piece Call of Bucher has done so far. It's again equipped with a peripheral rotor. It's quite a stunning piece, limited to 88 pieces and priced at $399,000. Next to that, we have the Ulysse Nardin Blast Hour Strike, and I think Mark, you covered that pretty extensively.
Yes, actually, both of these pieces. To just quickly swing back to the Bucherer, it's a peripheral rotor, but it's also a peripherally mounted tourbillon and a peripherally mounted regulator for the minute repeater, which is the first. They're calling it a triple perpetual, so that's part of that. And the Ulysse Nardin here is a chiming watch in the new Blast collection, which is kind of their really avant-garde skeletonized tourbillon equipped line. And again, Ulysse had three really they kept it to a fairly small output, but each of these pieces was really notable. And this was if we discount the clock and the skeleton diver, this was certainly the most complex timepiece.
The UFO, by the way, one of my favorites because it just transports the whole marine chronometer into a whole new era. If all goes according to plan, I should be able to see the Call of Bucher upcoming Monday. So I'm looking forward to have that piece in my hands or maybe on my wrist. We'll see. Michael? Materials, like in previous years, the trend towards unusual, different, innovative, or just different materials continues to keep the watch industry busy. Maybe the headliner here has been the Hublot with a bracelet made out of sapphire. And Mark, jump in, please.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, Hublot has been doing this for a while. They were not the first to do an all sapphire case. They were the first to do them on an industrial level. So they take some pride in that. And this watch, when I was writing the story, I looked back on the previous articles, and it's rather amazing just how quickly Hublot has just rallied all of these different innovations together. It was only last year that they introduced both the integrated bracelet Big Bang series, the Big Bang Integral, which this is, and just a few months after that was the this self-winding tourbillon skeletonized movement that they're using. And then just a few months after that, essentially for Watches and Wonders, they put this all into the first sapphire case and bracelet with this tourbillon movement. So they're really kind of hyper speed with how they're producing these things now.
Speaking of bracelet, the mother of bracelet has been presented by Royal Forsay this year, but you'll read more about that in the upcoming issue. The Hublot is priced at $422,000, and I think you'll get a lifetime supply of Windex with it. Panerai has done the sustainable thing. This is the watch with the highest amount of recycled materials that we currently have in the industry. You might remember the Untitled Diver that we have presented a couple of months ago, which still is a prototype. So Panerai has gone much further here and is using recycled materials. The one thing that I cannot really get my head wrapped around it is it's limited to 30 pieces, and so the footprint that it will leave might be a bit smaller than they had hoped for. But different materials. Tudor, Mark.
The Tudor. This is the silver version of the new Black Bay. The dial was interesting. I remember you and I had a discussion with our friend from Tudor, and I guess there's still some in-house. They're calling it a taupe dial, but it can be gray, it can be kind of beige. So that's kind of an in-house discussion that's still, I guess, going on as to what to call it. But this made a really big splash. Obviously, silver is extremely rare these days for a watch case. I think Zenith makes a few.
Yep.
You can count them on one hand, probably. Bell and Ross, I think, tried it a while back. To see it in kind of a power brand like Tudor is kind of interesting.
And obviously, there's also been a gold version of that watch as well, which is significantly more expensive. I think the price value here is still interesting. The material is unusual. For me, what surprised me is I would have bet a lot of money on them introducing a ceramic version of the Black Bay. After the only watch auction where they had an all black ceramic version of a Black Bay, it felt like they were testing the waters to then introduce a standard Black Bay in ceramic. And therefore, I totally did not expect a silver case. That came a bit as a surprise. It does have a display case back, which some people have been critical about it because the movement is not really finished. It's rather industrial.
It's right, and they had a kind of a precious metal theme this year with the silver and the gold.
Yes.
Kind of what people were not expecting from Tudor. And I believe I'm getting the yellow gold version next week. So fingers crossed.
And to answer Eric's questions, we just published, Caleb has published yesterday or 2 days ago an extensive story with a hands-on on the Tudor, where he dives into the added components to the material. So there you should get your answer. It's not just silver, they have something added.
Yeah.
Michael, this is the dive category, and I picked three. Personally, for me, the Oris that what limited edition, which is not featured here, has one of the most stunning dials I've seen in a while. But we have seen something similar with the Source of Life a couple of years ago. It has a moon indication and tidal hub thing going on, which is ultra complicated to read, but it's really looking nice. So we picked the Aquis Pro, which is the first professional themed dive watch from Oris featuring the new movement, which comes up with up to 10 years of warranty, which still is impressive and certainly an industry benchmark. It's rather big with close to 49 millimeters, so I was surprised to have it on my wrist. It is big. What made it a bit more special is that apparently Oris is now reducing the number of collections. They have the 65 diver, they have the Aquis, and they used to have the Pro diver. They still have the Pro diver on their website, but now that we have an Aquis Pro, I would assume that they're slimming the whole thing down to 65 and Aquis. Tag Heuer have redesigned the Aqua Racer. They now have a tiny Bulgari Octo on the dial. No, I'm obviously joking. It's what they call a tribute to the 844 reference from the late 70s, which was the first dive watch from Tag Heuer, initially produced in France with the Monin case, and then eventually moved over to Switzerland. So you'll find cases with a Swiss made and cases without. And this is a limited edition, which is 4,350 and limited to 844 pieces, which is a comparatively low number for Tag Heuer. Ulysse Nardin, on the other hand, have introduced a skeletonized diver, which I think is really unusual. I've already seen it in Geneva last 2 weeks ago. It is much more legible than I had expected. The only thing that I was a little bit surprised is that they didn't use more of the sustainability themes that they worked on with the Diver Net 1 mark, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Now, what is that bezel made of?
It's a carbon titanium combination.
Right.
So it's a bit metallic. Every single piece looks different because it's forged carbon added with a little bit of titanium. It's blue and available with an orange or a blue rubber strap.
So we do see Ulysse kind of doubling down on that X motif and
Yes.
that kind of avant-garde look, as well as trying to embrace its maritime past with this model here.
It certainly is different. There are actually a couple of more divers coming from Ulysse Nardin. There is a new limited edition called the Lemon Shark, and there is a marine diver 44 millimeter in blue with rose gold that actually looks nice, but for whatever reason was not part of the press kit that they initially sent around. Michael. Mark, I think you
Elephant in the room.
Hermes.
Hermes. Yes, this is the new H08, which actually I think Caleb Anderson wrote the article, but I looked into this one, and it's just another take on the kind of sporty but luxurious Hermes look, with a very different case shape for Hermes. As a brand, they always tend to be very detail oriented in the fonts they use for their numerals. As you can see, they kind of resemble these horse racing bits, if you look closely, with these kind of oval things. And the strap material is also unusual for Hermes. Personally, I think they make really nice luxury watches for men and ladies. This one, and the movements are basically in-house, as they're connected under a corporate umbrella with Vaucher, which makes really good Swiss movements. So they're high quality products, the Hermes Montre Hermes products, and this one, like I said, this one got some attention despite a lot of competition for coverage in this Watches and Wonders.
Yep, and that's the competition next to it. Perhaps the most discussed watch, but not just during Watches and Wonders. Obviously, the moment when Patek confirmed that the 5711 would be discontinued, prices skyrocketed for that model, and this is the goodbye, as Thierry Stern put it. He's not a big fan of the Nautilus, never has been, or at least not of the stainless steel version. So they're discontinuing this, and we'll have a final run with a green emerald dial for the Nautilus. The official list price, and again, yes, this is a lot of irony and sarcasm there, would be 34,000 and something. And obviously, it is impossible to get. Some of the retailers have already voiced their sorrows that they might get one. And again, I mean, that puts them too in a different position, in a difficult position, because how are you satisfying that much demand for a watch? How do you make sure that actually the right people are getting the watches? So that might be an interesting farewell for an iconic model. And again, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how the Nautilus as a collection is going to continue next year. Some of you might have heard the rumors with the titanium version. We don't know what Patek is planning on doing with the Nautilus. So far, they have a tendency to do unexpected things. I did have the opportunity to talk to Thierry Stern during Watches and Wonders, and obviously the Calatrava and the Aquanaut are going to be the entry-level models for for the future, and it's no longer going to be the Nautilus. Michael. That came a bit as a surprise because it was also not part of the official press kit from IWC. We did not expect that. We did not see that coming. This is the IWC Big Pilot's Watch Shock Absorber XPL. And again, there is an X in there. It is super shock proof, resistant to all G's you might experience in your cockpit. Production is limited to 10 pieces a year to total 30. It comes with a hefty price tag, 83,600, and certainly is interesting in terms of design language because it adds something that we have not yet seen from IWC. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I saw this watch for the first time just a short while ago, being buried in the other pilot releases. But looking at it, it does continue, and I'm sure this is probably part of their presentation. If you think about the IWC Big Pilot, it really is a luxury. It's an example. There are very few examples, maybe Panerai, Luminor, a few others, of a watch that started out as a true tool watch that evolved into a real luxury, iconic piece. And from the beginning, IWC's pilot watches were all about utility, even starting with the giant numerals, the luminous, and the in the later generation with the anti-magnetic soft iron case or cage inside the case. So this really just seems to be another evolution of that, making a mechanical watch that is designed for, you know, the rigors of in a cockpit, even though probably very few of them are going to be worn in a cockpit.
Yep, drone pilots.
Yeah,
I did not see Tudor in Vegas. I am going to see Tudor in May. I think May 6th is when I'll finally have a hands-on with the collection. I think, Mark, you've already seen the watches in person, haven't you?
the Tudor watches.
Yeah.
Just in the same video presentation. As I said, they're supposed to be sending me one next week. I think our colleague Caleb Anderson managed to see them
Yes.
at a boutique in New
He
York.
went to a retailer and saw one. Yes, now that I have successfully hijacked a discussion going on in the chat, I return to the real discussion. The gold square section is actually a gold square section. This is the frame that holds the movement container in there. So it is gold. It's not a light reflection. Not made out of gold, but gold colored. So questions, as mentioned in the beginning, we have been getting plenty, and let's start with the first one. Michael? Oh, no. Oh, darn. I forgot the
How
rose
could we
gold.
forget?
Yep, I did forget this one. Obviously, this was one of the headliners too. Mark.
Oh, Rolex Explorer. There was a new Explorer and a new Explorer 2. I think the Explorer got the lion's share of the interest because Rolex created it not only in two-tone, but in its kind of vintage appropriate 36 millimeter size. It's got a super modern movement. It's got all of the bells and whistles that one expects of a modern Rolex, all these patented developments in the case, the bracelet, the movement, the chromalite on the numerals. It's just an upgraded version of the Explorer that most people, again, probably weren't expecting. And the Zenith, of course, is on a different level of complexity, I would say, in both appearance and technology.
And I did get to see the new DeFi Extreme from Zenith, which came really unexpected for me when I saw it in Neuchâtel a couple of weeks ago. They have 3 models. They're all made out of titanium, but in a very different case finish. So one has a finish like stainless steel. This obviously is the sandblasted titanium with rose gold, which is why it ended up in the two-tone section. It's also the most expensive one at 22,000. It does look striking on the wrist. It's with 45 millimeter diameter. It's also kind of big. They have a new quick change strap system for the bracelet, which works nicely. It's an unusual watch. It's unexpected. And yeah, it is there. It is extreme.
Yeah. And it does help Zenith stream. I mean, Zenith, I know, has made a big effort to streamline what used to be a really kind of unwieldy collection to the Zenith Defy, the Defy Extreme, and the Chronomaster with the Sport. They're all very very different, and yet all kind of based on that El Primero chronograph heritage.
Yeah. And judging on what they've done with the DeFi, where they have the classic three-hand model with a skeletonized dial, and that answer goes to Wolfgang in the chat, it would not be totally unexpected for them to come up with an automatic version without the chrono sometime in the future, but certainly not now, because now they have to establish a completely new collection, see how it's going to be received by the public, and then we probably might see something else on top of that. Traveling section is the next one, Michael. Thank you for the heads up. Chopard had a really nice surprise with that black travel watch, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I love these Chopard travel watches when they came out 5 years ago in the steel and precious metal. And the black is, the all black is just kind of a more avant-garde take on them. There's a lot to explain. This one is the world timer. The other one I think is just more of a GMT. It's a very user-friendly world timer. The two crowns, everything can be set via the two crowns. And again, Chopard, another brand that's maybe more known by watch aficionados as a jeweler, but makes some amazing, high, complicated timepieces at a really high-end manufacturer in Fleurier. I'm forgetting the name.
Yep. And we have seen another bronze version. We have also seen a bronzo in 42 millimeter from Panerai, but Montblanc too has released another bronze version of their Geosphere, which, and that's always the same thing with bronze. Every time I see a bronze watch, I think to myself, when is this trend going to end? And then they release another one, which just looks beautiful on the wrist. And I've just checked the website. It apparently is no longer available. So that too seems to be commercially as successful as they had hoped. So the Desert Edition dedicated to Reinhold Messner, priced at 6,500. I might be able to answer that, Alan, but later. Mm-hmm. Good. I think that's pretty much it with the summary of Watches and Wonders, and that should be where we dive into the questions that we have received beforehand. Yes, now I'm right. So one question was if Rolex will ever launch watches outside of the trade shows, and they have not done that until 2012, when if I remember correctly, like a week after Basel, they had not launched, but shown the prototype watch, which was a deep sea challenge, which obviously was linked to the record dive with James Cameron. So that didn't happen during Basel World. That was the explanation there. The submarine last year was launched because Basel World didn't happen. And the Cameron edition with the deep sea with the degradé dial 2 was introduced. And I think that's probably the first one in a while where they had introduced a standard model outside of Basel just throughout the year. That was August in 2014. So Rolex is still supporting the shows, while some of the Swatch Group brands have already publicly denied that they are interested in joining a trade show ever again. And that requires them to stick to the deadlines, and we'll see where they will be going. But it's not unusual for them to do things outside of the regular trade show calendar.
Yeah, no, and I think last year, I mean, the no one can be set in their ways anymore. I think after last year, and we're already seeing that with brands like Rolex and Patek Philippe taking part in Watches and Wonders, which of course evolved from a mostly Richemont event.
Yep, a lot has changed last year. That was a difficult to answer. Are there collectors out there who actually purchase stuff from Jacob and Co? And that kind of goes into watch snobism that not only goes downwards but also upwards. I think we all have to agree that there is a different audience for different brands, and it's, I think what Jacob and Co has been doing, they really have launched some exceptional and outstanding pieces, but obviously the standard collector audience that is hanging outside of a Phillips watch auctions looking for vintage pieces, a bit more traditional, conservative, might not be as attracted to pieces like that. But on the other hand, the whole industry has a history of trying to produce watches that are addressing different target audiences. I mean, the oil pump from Jacob and Co. can also be found at Ulysse Nardin with an oil rig. Same time as the whole erotic watches. This one is a one from Ulysse Nardin. That's not everyone's taste. And yep, the Audemars Piguet Marvel is also something that I actually haven't made up my mind. So I think it's difficult to judge a brand on something that is just linked to a very different target audience. And Mark, you put it really nicely when we went through the presentation before with
Oh,
their audience.
yeah, well, the fact that Jacob at Jacob and Company as a jeweler is not known for producing understated pieces, and it makes sense. I mean, they know their audience, or they wouldn't survive as a company. And as a watchmaker, it would make sense that they would follow that kind of that same philosophy. I've actually seen the Godfather Jacob and Company watch that somebody referenced in the question. And from a technical standpoint, it is amazing. It is extremely, what would be the opulent, shall we say? But it chimes the Godfather theme, which, you know, it's kind of impressive that you can actually create something like that. But again, it's probably not the same guy that's buying a Rolex two-tone Explorer 36 millimeters, but one never knows.
But the short answer is yes, people are buying these pieces because they are attractive to one or the other audiences. And it's the same thing with people do collect Invictas, others collect Pateks, others collect Jacobs and Co. Maybe this is a one-time purchase, just it's a different audience, but they do have every right to exist and really are outstanding once you hold one in your hand. But yes, they're also not comparable to a Patek Philippe perpetual calendar, perhaps. Michael, next one. That was a bit more difficult to answer. Green. Yes, we have seen a huge number of novelties that are using green dials or green straps or just work with the green theme, and it's almost impossible to explain how a trend comes into existence. But probably the short version is Rolex being by far the largest and best known luxury watch brand in the world, releasing a watch working with green in 2003 did have an impact on the watch industry. But surrounding the watch industry is a lot going on. We have sustainability, we have color of the year 2017 green. So it really comes down to a combination of a renaissance of green. And at the end of the day, if we, the customer, buy green dialed watches, why wouldn't the watch industry produce them? And boy, they have been really good looking so far.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's also, I guess, kind of a snowball effect, really, when a brand like Rolex and maybe some other really popular brands kind of go out on a limb. Maybe it was going out on a limb to produce something in green at one point, and then it catches on, and at some point, every other brand is going to notice this catching on, much like blue dials just not that long ago, and probably that kind of monochromatic black look before that. It's kind of a Me Too industry in a way. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's kind of the market determining a lot of it. But certainly,
And at the same time, I mean, with the swatch, we moved on to owning more than one watch. And if you own more than one watch and they all have a black dial or all a dive watch, you might be embracing the opportunity to add some color to your collection. And most of it's the same with bronze. They happen to really look good.
Yeah. And Sean Hansen in the chat actually made a very good point that green is it's versatile. You can do lots of different shades of green. We've seen this pistachio, we've seen more of a military olive green, we've seen really bright and shiny. So that may contribute also.
Good. Let's move on to the next one. How do you feel about Omega's novelties? I mean, obviously, Omega has not been part of Watches and Wonders. They have done their thing shortly before the show. It was not the biggest revelation of novelties. It was a comparatively small number of new pieces that indicates two things. One, Swatch Group is no longer using trade shows as platforms to launch models. So they moved on to let's have something regularly throughout the year to just create impulses for retail. They have started the year with the Speedmaster, and I think January 5th was that. And the Speedmaster has been their most important model. So the big novelty actually happened in January. And looking back at last year, there is still a lot of product out in the market. So the responsible thing to do is to focus on smaller collections, niche models, and not overflood the market with the next huge launch. So personally, what I've seen, and Wolfgang is asking to see the bronze gold Seamaster. I did drive to Beale. Michael, if you could go to the next page. And I just did a short video, which is the closest thing we can do to take you to retail and handle the watches. So that's the black Seamaster 300, which is surprisingly legible under daylight condition. That is a watch that has not been communicated in their press kit. It's also ceramic version, but with a rose gold, Sedna gold bezel. Also good looking, and I apologize for my forehead being reflected in the crystal. That is the new Seamaster 300 with a sandwich dial. That's the bronze gold version, which doesn't have the lollipop hand, but the standard second hand that we've seen with previous models. That's the blue dial version. Impossible to shoot, but it has grown on me. And as you might see, I'm wearing the predecessor of that model. Personally, I did fall in love with the brown dial Tresor in the Devil collection, which really looked amazing. So that was pretty much what we have seen at Omega. Yep, Omega is doing what Omega is doing best. They have amazing pieces. Mark.
Well, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, I'm envious you got to see and handle a lot of these pieces. It's just to answer the general question, Omega to me, as I've told anyone who'll listen, is a brand that almost never makes an unattractive watch. I just think they do well in every category, whether it's a super technical looking dive watch or something dressy like what's on the screen now. I just think they have a really good track record with their design and not going too out in left field with their designs, and just kind of knowing what's strong for them.
There's also a small second version of the Aquaterra that has not yet really been covered. And the small second version that you're seeing with the brown dial is also available with a gray dial and a stainless steel case, and that really looks nice. So, yep. And I couldn't agree more with Sean. They are underrated in the dress watch category, but that happens when you have a moon watch. Michael, next one. So obviously that has been a question that we have been receiving quite a lot. What our thoughts are with the new green Nautilus from Patek. I mean, obviously, yes, it is short-lived because that's how it's intended. It's only going to be produced for a year. It's going to be very difficult to get. I don't think it's a marketing scheme. But at the same time, it is weird that Patek has decided to no longer be producing the watch and then adds another one which feels a bit like dangling something in front of collectors. But again, this is luxury. The luxury industry usually has a tendency to create products that seem to be unobtainable. Otherwise, it wouldn't be luxury. So the guy who buys a 300-foot yacht will at some point realize that someone else has a 350-foot yacht, and there you go.
Right. I mean, to give a very, I guess, libertarian type answer to I mean, everything that's any campaign to sell a product is a marketing scheme, really. It's not a bad thing to sell a product. I think the heart of the question here is that does this kind of detract from Patek at all? Have they betrayed anything by creating a watch like this? And I don't think they have. It's still a Nautilus. They have been, as a brand, experimenting with color for quite a while now. The whole exclusivity and possibility of getting it is a whole other topic, but I mean, there was excitement about this watch, and I see why there was excitement about it.
Yep. And again, congrats to anyone who actually can get one. Next one, Michael. Short answer, yes. So you'll find the link to the video recording on the website if you want to watch last week or 2 weeks ago. I cannot remember the citizen event we had with a couple of hardcore divers that certainly touched some new territory for us as well. Next one, Michael. There is one picture missing here, but we can do without. Actually, I just received a text message from the CEO of Mondan, from Andre Bernheim. I sent him the link, but apparently he cannot join us because we did get the question, could you take a look at Mondan? They seem to be running out of steam. And I think the opposite is the case. It's maybe a bit similar to the Jacob and Co discussion we just had. It's a different target audience. Mondan is doing extremely well when it comes to sustainability. Again, is one of the first entirely carbon neutral watch companies in the world, which is very different to what we're seeing from most of the big watch brands using sustainability as a marketing platform to have a vehicle to communicate. Mondan is not doing that. Instead of, they actually have transformed their whole production to a carbon neutral process, which I think is amazing. Same thing with the limited edition Bear Grylls watch that you see down there. It's actually made out of recycled parts. And while we see a lot of the higher end brands using concept watches to work with recycled parts, they have already commercialized a watch that's using a recycled case. So I think Mondan is doing well without knowing the numbers. They have been very innovative in the last couple of years, but it's just, if they finally were to start reusing mechanical movements again, we could cover them more often. So I think that hopefully explains that I don't think that Mondan is running out of steam. It's just they're not always on our radar. Mark, anything you want to add?
I think you've said it all. Yeah, it's an interesting brand. As you know, it's a very, very Swiss centric brand. Yeah.
And to answer Alan's question is, I mean, they're still doing mostly the train station clock, which is shown in the upper corner with the vegan watch. So the design hasn't changed, and that puts them in a very convenient place, similar to the Nautilus from Patek. It's a highly recognizable design, but at the same time, it prevents you from moving away from that design. So the more iconic a product is, the more difficulties you will have to establish a code 1159 if you're Audemars Piguet and have a Royal Oak, or something else in the case of Mondan. They have done the Helvetica, which is a semi-smart watch that has been launched a couple of years ago. But yes, people do want to buy the Swiss Trains Railway design watch. Michael, next one. That's an easy to answer. Best guess on the reduction in numbers of non-luxury watches sold in 2020 versus 2018. The numbers are there. It's pretty much cut in half. But I don't know why the question has been asked. If it is to get an understanding of COVID, the Swiss watch industry has, for the last 20 years, been trying successfully to leave the entry level segment behind and go high end. So if you look at 2000 numbers, we actually currently have a third of numbers produced. And this is not because the watches are not performing well. This is a deliberate decision by the Swiss to increase the value of every piece sold, which is something that has paid off in the past. But at the same time, I'm highly skeptical, because if we're looking back at the quartz crisis, at the end of the day, the swatch did save the industry because it was in the entry level category. So giving up the very category that once saved your life seems to me kind of dangerous. Um, so we'll see. But here are the numbers. It's half. Next one, Michael.
Probably similar to most other industries.
Yes. Again, context is difficult. The question has been, how do companies get away with charging thousands for watches using the Salida or ETA movements? First of all, there is nothing wrong with using ETA or Salida movements. They are as reliable as movements can become, and they usually help watch brands to keep prices a bit lower. Obviously, and I would assume the question is intended at those hiding the fact that they're selling a watch using a standard base movement, but usually it's not just about the movement. And the reason why I added BMW and Apple is the watch industry is by far not the only industry using parts and components from third-party suppliers. Looking at the car industry, not every BMW is powered by a BMW engine. Not every screen from Apple is an Apple screen. So that's certainly something difficult. And Salida has been doing really great in terms of movement diversity and quality. In some cases, the Salida clone movements have reached a different quality level because they now even produce the ball bearing components in Switzerland, which is a different level of precision. And again, I just used one of the monopusher chronograph movements that was initially used exclusively by Montblanc to have a monopusher chronograph. So I don't think it's something bad. I can understand why people could be disappointed or skeptical or expect like being betrayed by the watch industry, but quite often it's not. And it really is much more than a single component. For instance, simply regulating these movements is so costly that this already adds a lot of money to the invoice. And that brings me almost to the next slide, Michael, if you could switch to the next one. I think whatever you do, and that's not just buying watches, it's really your own expectation management. If you're a movement guy, then you shouldn't be buying one of the watches that is using a standard base movement. At the same time, if you appreciate handmade watch movements, then maybe do not expect a G-Shock in terms of toughness. So it's really about knowing what you want to have. We try everything that we can to Yep, and actually the funny thing about that graph is I based it on my on my understanding of Rolex. So they rank high in in-house capabilities, but maybe are not the most approachable brand. So you can do that with every brand, and you might come up with a different set of values. Maybe you appreciate the industrial scale, while Philippe Dufour is something completely different. So the better you know what you're looking for, the more likely you will be happy with what you have purchased. And if movement is your main criteria, then this is where you have to focus. But quite often, and that's my favorite example, if you look at the Call of Bucharest scuba tech, which is using either an ETA or Salida movement, the longer we wait, the more likely it's going to be a Salida movement, because ETA is really no longer supplying third-party brands. They have invested pretty much everything in dial, hands, case, and bracelet. While compared to that, a Tudor Black Bay, which I still think is one of the best buys you can make, has a comparatively standard case that's simply polished and it's just produced out of one block. So that really is my answer to everyone. With everything you buy, know what you're looking for, and we try everything in our power to be as transparent as possible in order to prevent you from being disappointed. Mark,
Right.
help me.
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, but if I'm not mistaken, the idea, the massive vertical integration in the industry is a relatively modern thing. For the history of watchmaking, I believe it was called the établisseur system in the really early days. One farmhouse would make the rotors and one farmhouse would make the crowns. And companies like Omega and Longines and various others came in and kind of put this all under one roof. And as people have made many points about the BMW engines and Rolls-Royce, and basically you want the specialists to make the parts that you use. And if you can have those specialists in-house, it's great. But if it makes more sense for your company to outsource those specialties, I mean, most of the watch brands that make diamond watches still have to outsource that because they're not expert at it. It's all about making the best product at the best price. Certainly there are probably companies that abuse the marketing hype to price things higher, but it's.
And I mean, funny example, in the 60s, Jacques Rowe was used as the most dominant supplier of finished watches to the industry. So Jacques Rowe in the 60s had a catalog with about 5,000 models that could be ordered by the whole industry. So, and at the same time, don't complain about having to go back to the manufacturer of your movement and pay a comparatively expensive service and repair, because now you have to go back to the in-house brand that is the only party in the whole thing that has the spare parts. So again, there is no right or wrong, but you need to know what you're looking for in your next purchase. Good. Minda, I think.
Yes, I think we are at that hour. But I do thank you, Roger and Mark, so much. This was so interesting. I don't think we're going to have time for individual questions, but if you guys want to send them to me for next time, please do. But we do have to do our wrist shot. Okay, yes. So somebody from the WatchTime team, please take a screenshot, and everybody, 1, 2, 3. Yay, everybody. Okay, thanks everybody. It's great seeing you all. Thank you, Roger and Mark, for all that information. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions, but we know you have tight schedules. And
we'll keep these questions, so keep them coming. It really is super helpful for us to do something that addresses all the questions you actually have. Back to you, Minda.
See you all next month, and May 12th or 13th for IWC. Bye, everybody.
So long. Thanks, everyone.